It was a blazing Monday morning in the middle of summer when Daniel Brooks placed his company badge on the HR desk, ending 12 years of loyalty in silence. No argument, no negotiation, just one sentence. "My daughter needs me." 3 days later, in a quiet town miles away from glass towers and deadlines, a black luxury car pulled up in front of his small wooden house. When Daniel opened the door, he froze. Standing there, under the harsh summer sun, was his CEO. Evelyn Carter didn't come with security. She came alone, and she wasn't there to fire him. She was there with a secret. The building's air conditioning had been running full blast since 7 in the morning. But Daniel Brooks was sweating by the time he reached the 14th floor. He'd been at Arcturus Technologies for 12 years. 12 years of Monday morning stand-ups, quarterly reviews, late nights before product launches. He knew which elevator was fastest. He knew the coffee machine on the 3rd floor made better espresso than the one on 12. He knew which glass-walled conference rooms had broken thermostats and which ones got full afternoon sun. He knew this building the way you know a place you never planned to love. He knew the names of the security guards on the night shift. He knew which maintenance guy would fix a stuck drawer without being asked twice. He knew that the printer on the east side of floor 12 jammed on Mondays for reasons nobody had ever adequately explained. And that the best view of the city, the real view, the one that made you feel something, was from the stairwell window between 9 and 10, before the morning glare came in. He'd never told anyone that. He set his badge on Margaret Okafor's desk without making eye contact. Margaret, HR director, 23 years with the company, keeper of a small succulent named Gerald on the corner of her desk, looked up from her monitor and immediately went still. "Daniel, I need to submit a formal resignation." He placed the envelope beside his badge. His name was on the front in his own handwriting. He'd written it at 2 a.m., on the kitchen table while Lily slept, effective immediately. "I understand I'm forfeiting the 2-week notice period." Margaret stood. "Daniel, wait, let me get someone from leadership. There's nothing to discuss. There are protocols. There's a severance conversation, a transition plan." "Margaret." He finally looked at her. She went quiet. He'd never spoken her name like that before, not sharp, not unkind, just completely finished. "I appreciate everything. I do. But it's done." He walked to his desk and spent 12 minutes clearing it. A photo of Lily at the beach, age 4, squinting into the sun with a missing front tooth. A ceramic mug she'd made him at a summer art camp the year before everything changed. A notepad with his handwriting on the top page, a grocery list, he realized, from 3 Saturdays ago. Eggs, yogurt, Lily's apple juice, the kind without the pulp. He put everything in a cardboard box that someone had left in the supply room. His co-worker Brendan Walsh appeared at the edge of his cubicle, coffee in hand, face arranged into the expression of a man who doesn't know what to say but feels he should say something. "Hey, is it true? Yeah, but the Morrison account we're presenting in 3 weeks. Nathan can run it. He knows the file." "Daniel, come on. What's going on? Is it money? Because I know Victor has been—" "It's not money." Brendan lowered his voice. "Is it Lily?" Daniel picked up his box. He paused for exactly 1 second. "It's always been Lily." He rode the elevator down alone. The lobby was busy, people arriving, badges scanning, someone laughing at something on their phone. The revolving door pushed him out into the summer morning, and the heat hit him immediately, solid and real. Nothing like the recycled cold inside. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment, box under his arm, looking up at the glass tower. 14 floors of meetings and targets and performance reviews. 12 years. He turned and walked toward the parking garage. The thing about glass buildings is that you can see out, but you can never quite feel the sun. He'd forgotten what that felt like. He was about to remember. Claire Brooks died on a Tuesday in November. She'd gone out to pick up Lily from her piano lesson, the same route she'd driven 40 times before, past the hardware store and the dry cleaner and the corner with the broken traffic light that the city had been promising to fix for 2 years. A truck ran the intersection. The responding officer told Daniel it had been quick. He'd said it like it was a gift. Lily had been in the car. She walked away with a bruised collarbone and a cut above her left ear that needed 4 stitches. Physically, she was fine. The pediatric trauma specialist used those exact words. Physically, fine. She said it with the careful emphasis of someone who needed to be understood. Lily had been talking non-stop since she was 2 years old. Full sentences at 2.5, complex questions by 3. An unstoppable running commentary on everything. She observed the shape of clouds, the way French fries tasted better with the dipping sauce on the side, whether dogs dreamed about running or about being petted. She'd had opinions about everything. She'd had a laugh that could fill a room. She stopped talking 4 days after the accident. Not gradually, not reluctantly. She just stopped. The first morning, Daniel assumed she was tired. The second, he thought she was grieving in her own way. By the 4th day, when he asked her what she wanted for breakfast and she only looked at him not blankly, not angrily, but with a kind of stillness that was more unsettling than either, he called the pediatrician. 3 specialists over 6 months. A trauma therapist named Doctor. Paula Reeves, who had a warm office with a sand tray and a lot of patients, confirmed what Daniel had begun to suspect. Lily's silence was a response, a withdrawal. Her nervous system was doing what nervous systems do when the world has become too loud to survive. She wasn't broken. She was protecting herself. Daniel went back to work 2 weeks after the funeral because the mortgage existed and Lily's therapy wasn't cheap and there was no other option. He hired a sitter, a patient woman named Barbara, who'd raised 4 children of her own and who understood that silence from a child wasn't always a problem to be solved. Barbara brought her knitting and sat in the armchair by the window and existed quietly beside Lily in a way that didn't demand anything, which turned out to be exactly right. He dropped Lily off at school every morning, drove 45 minutes to the office, sat through meetings where people used words like synergy and bandwidth, and drove home to a daughter who would meet him at the door with her brown eyes and her arms and no words. Her teacher, a young woman named Miss Holloway who'd been teaching 2nd grade for 3 years and had the particular gift of knowing when not to push, emailed Daniel weekly with brief, careful updates. Lily participated in painting today. She chose blue, or Lily sat with the reading group. She tracked the pages, small dispatches from a world where his daughter was managing, in her way, to keep going. He told himself it was enough. He told himself every night, with the specific determination of someone who knows the alternative. But at 2 a.m., when the house was quiet and the summer night pressed against the windows, and he could hear Lily through the wall, not crying, not making a sound, just the faint shift of her small body in her bed, he would sit at the kitchen table and feel the distance between who he was and who she needed him to be. And it was not a small distance. The kitchen table had become the place he went when everything else was exhausted. He'd sit with his hands around a cup of tea he'd forgotten to drink, looking at the spot where Claire used to sit, her chair pulled out at the slight angle she'd always left it, and try to do the math of how to be 2 people at once. A father who was fully present, a professional who was still functional, a person who was, in some foundational way, still standing. He was managing all 3, just barely, and only by holding very still. She drew, still. That hadn't left her. Whole pads of paper filled with crayon and colored pencil. Animals, mostly, and houses, and trees. He studied them the way he used to study project briefs, looking for pattern, for meaning, for something he could act on. One evening in June, 6 months after he'd gone back to work, he found a drawing she'd left on the coffee table, a small wooden house like his parents' place in Sunridge, the one he hadn't been to in 3 years. A yard. A tree, a tall figure and a small figure standing side by side. 2 people. He looked at it for a long time. He counted them again. Just 2. She'd left a space to the right of them. Not empty exactly. More like room. He quit the following Monday. Sunridge, Oregon, was not a place that appeared on many people's travel lists. It had a population of just over 3,000, a single main street with a diner, a hardware store, a used bookshop, and a pharmacy that also sold fishing tackle. It sat in a valley between low rolling hills that turned golden in summer and dark green after rain. The nearest city was an hour and 40 minutes east, which felt, to the people of Sunridge, like exactly the right amount of distance from everything. Daniel's parents had bought the house on Birch Road in 1987. His father had been a high school shop teacher. His mother had worked at the county library for 30 years. They'd retired to Scottsdale 6 years ago. The Knees, his father said, were done with Oregon winters, and the house had sat mostly empty since, used occasionally for summers and holidays, kept up by a neighbor named Walt who mowed the yard and reported any broken gutters. Daniel called his mother from the parking garage of Arcturus Technologies the day he quit. "I need the house," he said. A pause. "For how long?" "I don't know." Another pause, longer this time. "Then, Walt will have a key for you. I'll call him today, and Daniel bring extra blankets. The upstairs radiator still runs cold. The drive from Portland to Sunridge took 90 minutes. Lily sat in the back seat with her stuffed rabbit, a gray lop-eared thing named Biscuit that had been with her since she was 18 months old, and watched the landscape change through the window. By the time the highway gave way to county roads and the hills opened up around them, she had her face pressed to the glass. Daniel watched her in the rearview mirror and said nothing. The house was exactly as he remembered it. White clapboard, a covered front porch with 2 rocking chairs that had been there since before he was born, a backyard that sloped down toward a small creek that ran year-round. The oak tree he'd climbed as a kid still stood in the side yard, its branches spreading wide and low enough that a child could reach the first one if she tried. He carried their bags in while Lily stood in the middle of the living room and turned slowly, taking in the braided rug and the stone fireplace and the low shelves of old books and the afternoon light falling through the west-facing windows in long, warm bars. He watched her. She put Biscuit down on the arm of the couch. She walked to the window. She stood there for a long time, looking at the backyard, at the creek that caught the sun, at the oak tree. Then she reached out and touched the glass with one finger. Daniel unpacked the kitchen. He didn't cry until she was asleep that night. The weeks that followed had a different texture than anything he'd lived in the past 18 months. He found work at a neighbor's landscaping operation. Walt's son ran it, and he needed an extra pair of hands for summer, and Lily came with him most mornings, sitting in the shade with her drawing pad, while Daniel hauled mulch or planted borders or turned soil. She was quiet in the way she was always quiet. But it was a different quiet. Wider. Less sealed. She started noticing things. The way a robin would land and tilt its head before pulling a worm from the dirt. The patterns the sprinkler made in the grass. The specific green of new growth against old wood. She'd point. Sometimes. Just lift a finger and look at him. He'd look and nod and say, "I see it." It was enough. For now, it was enough. Evelyn Carter had not personally reviewed an individual resignation file in 4 years. She had a team for that. She had a head of people operations, an HR director, a succession planning lead, and 2 senior staffing analysts. She had processes. She had frameworks. She had, according to the most recent organizational audit, 37 direct and indirect reports whose entire function was to manage the kind of thing she was currently doing at 11:30 on a Thursday night, sitting at her desk with a cold cup of tea and a file that kept pulling her back. Daniel Brooks. Senior Product Operations Lead. Tenure. 12 years, 4 months. Resignation. Effective immediately. Reason cited. Family issue. She'd come across it by accident, or as close to accident as anything gets when you're the kind of person who reads everything. A monthly summary document had flagged unusual voluntary departures, and his name had been highlighted in yellow because his departure had triggered a cascade. 3 downstream projects without a lead, a client presentation rescheduled twice, a junior team member who'd formally requested reassignment. She'd looked him up. 12 years of performance reviews, all of them strong, most of them exceptional. A pattern of taking on projects that were underfunded and understaffed, and delivering them anyway. A note from 3 years ago, filed by a previous manager. Brooks has declined promotion to director level twice. Reason given. Doesn't want to travel. Family circumstances. She'd looked at the most recent HR exchange in his file. 6 weeks before his resignation, he'd submitted a formal request for a remote work arrangement, a 3-month trial, citing a documented family medical situation. The request had gone to Victor Hale, Chief Operations Officer, the person who, in Evelyn's estimation, had the emotional intelligence of a well-organized spreadsheet. Victor had denied it. The denial was 2 sentences. Remote work is not aligned with the current operational model for this position. Request declined. No alternative offered. No conversation logged. No escalation path noted. Evelyn set the file down and looked at the window. The city was still lit below her, traffic moving in slow amber lines. 12 years. She thought about what kind of person walks away from 12 years without a fight, without a negotiation, without even asking to speak to anyone above Victor Hale. Someone who'd already decided. Someone who didn't believe it would matter. She picked up the file again and read it from the beginning. By the time she finished, her tea was fully cold, and she'd made a decision that she would, later, be unable to entirely explain to herself in rational terms. She looked up his emergency contact. She looked up the address. She called her assistant at 7 the next morning and said, "Clear my Friday." The black sedan looked profoundly wrong on Birch Road. Daniel was in the backyard when he heard the car, the particular sound of something expensive, moving slowly over gravel, and he came around the side of the house in time to see it park at the curb. He assumed it was lost. People with cars like that were not, in his experience, looking for weathered clapboard houses in Sunridge, Oregon. Then the door opened. He recognized her immediately, which struck him later as strange, because he'd only been in the same room as Evelyn Carter perhaps 4 times in 12 years. She wasn't one of those executives who performed visibility. She didn't do Friday town halls or birthday announcements or casual floor walks. But you knew what she looked like. Everyone at Arcturus knew what she looked like. She was wearing a white linen shirt and dark trousers and carrying nothing except her car keys. No briefcase, no portfolio. She looked slightly out of place in the way that someone looks when they've made a decision and are committed enough to it not to feel embarrassed. She saw him standing at the side of the house and walked toward him. "Daniel Brooks," she said. "Miss Carter." A pause. They looked at each other across 15 feet of sunlit lawn. "You drove 3 hours," he said. 2.5. "The county road is faster than it looks." He said nothing. He wiped his hands on his work jeans. "I read your file," she said. "All of it." "I read Victor's denial. Miss Carter, Evelyn." He stopped. She held his gaze. "I'm not here in any official capacity," she said. "I'm not here to ask you to come back. I'm not here to make an offer. I came because—" She paused briefly, as if finding her footing. "Because something in how you left didn't add up to me, and I prefer to understand things." Before he could answer, the screen door opened. Lily appeared on the front porch. She was wearing a yellow sundress and she had a crayon behind her ear, and she was holding Biscuit with both arms. She looked at Evelyn with the frank, searching attention of a child who hasn't yet learned to pretend she isn't staring. Evelyn looked at Lily. Something shifted in her face. Not pity. Daniel had seen pity. He knew its texture, but something quieter and older than that. "Hi," Evelyn said. Lily didn't answer. But she didn't go back inside either. She sat down on the porch steps and set Biscuit beside her, and kept her eyes on Evelyn with a stillness that Daniel had learned not to interrupt. He looked at his daughter. He looked at his former CEO standing on his lawn in linen and dark trousers. "Do you want some coffee?" he said. Evelyn looked at him. For a fraction of a second, she looked almost relieved. "Yes," she said. "Thank you." She came back on Thursday. Daniel had not asked her to. She had not mentioned it when she'd left on Friday afternoon. They'd had coffee on the porch, talked for 2 hours about things that had nothing to do with Arcturus, and she'd driven away with a brief nod that told him nothing. He'd spent the weekend assuming it was a single visit and filing it away in the category of things he didn't need to understand. On Thursday at 11 in the morning, her car appeared at the curb again. This time she was carrying a paper bag. She set it on the porch railing without ceremony. I wasn't sure what she liked. There's a set of watercolor pencils, the good kind, not the waxy ones, and 2 blank sketchbooks, and a field guide to Pacific Northwest birds. She paused. Because of the robin. Daniel stared at her. "You noticed that?" She pointed at it for almost 30 seconds. He looked at the bag. He looked at Evelyn. "You didn't have to. I know." She said it simply, without deflection. Lily appeared in the doorway, drawn by some internal radar she seemed to have for the presence of the things she wanted. She looked at the bag on the railing. Then she looked at Evelyn. Then, with a slowness that Daniel recognized as deliberate, she came down the porch steps and approached the railing and looked into the bag. She stood there for a long moment. She reached in and pulled out the bird guide, held it with both hands, turned to a page in the middle and studied whatever was there with an expression of deep seriousness. "The cedar waxwing," Evelyn said, coming to stand beside her, not over her, beside her, at the same level. "They travel in flocks, and they pass berries to each other, beak to beak, down the line." Lily looked at the page. Then she looked at Evelyn. Then, with great solemnity, she held out the book. Evelyn took it, looked at the page, nodded as if this was a perfectly normal conference, handed it back. Daniel watched from the steps and said nothing. They stayed like that for a while, the 3 of them in the summer morning, the creek running behind the house, the oak tree doing nothing dramatic. Later, when Lily had gone inside with her new supplies and the sound of her drawing could be heard through the screen door, Evelyn sat in one of the rocking chairs and said, "My mother died when I was 9. Daniel sat in the other chair. "Car accident," she said, "in January. The year everything was ice." He didn't say he was sorry. He'd learned, over the past year, that people who have lost someone don't always need to be told that it's sorry-worthy. They know. What they sometimes need is just for the fact to exist in the room without being tidied away. "My father didn't know what to do," she said. "He was a good man, but he'd never had to figure me out before. My mother had always been the one who understood me. After she was gone, he just kept trying harder with all the same tools." She looked out at the yard. "It took a long time before someone thought to give me a notebook and a pencil and just sit next to me." The rocking chair made a small sound on the porch boards. "Who did?" Daniel said. "My Aunt Frances. A beat. Terrible cook. Tremendous human being." He looked at her sideways. For the first time since she'd arrived in Sunridge, she almost smiled. She stopped staying for an hour and started staying for the afternoon. It wasn't announced. There was no conversation where either of them acknowledged that the nature of these visits had changed. It happened the way most real things happen, incrementally. And then all at once, Daniel started cooking more. Not because she'd never asked, but because it felt strange to eat while a person you'd just spent 4 hours talking to drove away hungry. He made the kinds of things his mother had made in this kitchen. Soup from scratch. Bread that took too long. A lemon cake that Lily supervised with the focused intensity of a quality control inspector. Lily had started using the watercolors. The pages were loose and brilliant now, colors bleeding into each other. Birds, mostly, drawn from the field guide and then reinvented given extra wings, strange colors, properties that birds in nature did not possess. Daniel pinned them to the kitchen wall until the wall was mostly covered. One afternoon, 3 weeks into this new rhythm, Evelyn sat down at the kitchen table and said, "I want to tell you something, not as your former employer. Just to tell you." He sat across from her. "Victor Hale should never have denied that request," she said. "A 12-year employee with a documented family medical situation, requesting a 3-month remote trial. That denial was a failure of basic judgment, and it happened without my knowledge, and it shouldn't have." Daniel looked at the table. "I've been doing this work long enough to know the difference between someone who leaves because they're done with the job and someone who leaves because the job made them choose," she said. "You weren't done." "No," he said. "I wasn't. I'm building something new. I've been planning it for 18 months, and it's been waiting for the right moment and, honestly, the right person." She looked at him steadily. "It's called Project Lighthouse, a restructured support framework for employees navigating major family transitions. Medical, caregiving, bereavement, early parenthood, flexible architecture, real flexibility, not the performed kind. A structure that tells people, you don't have to choose." He was quiet for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I want you to lead it." He leaned back, looked at the ceiling, looked at the wall of Lily's paintings. "I don't want to go back," he said. "To the office, to the all of that. The role is remote. It's structured around real life. That's the point." She paused. "I'm not asking you to go back to what it was. I'm asking you to help build what it should be." Through the screen door, the sound of Lily in the backyard. The gentle thud of something the bird guide probably dropped on the porch. "She's getting better," Evelyn said. It wasn't a question. "Slowly," Daniel said. "But yeah, that's how it usually works." He looked at her. "You're not going to give me a deadline, are you?" He picked up his coffee cup. "Give me a week." That evening, clearing the dinner things, he found a new drawing on the table. Not birds this time. A house, the Birch Road house, clearly. A yard. An oak tree. 3 figures, one tall, one small, one medium height, with long hair. 3. He stood at the kitchen table holding it for a long time. The Arcturus Technologies boardroom occupied the corner of the 14th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides and a table long enough to seat 20. It was a room designed to make people feel that decisions made within it were important enough to deserve the view. Daniel had been in it twice in 12 years. Once for a company-wide strategy session he'd been asked to present at. Once, by accident, looking for a conference room that turned out to be on a different floor. He was here now by invitation. Evelyn had briefed him the night before. By phone, matter-of-factly. "The board has questions about Lighthouse. Victor has been working the room. I need you there not as an employee but as the person the policy would have helped. You don't have to present anything. You just have to tell the truth." He'd driven to Portland that morning, left Lily with Walt's daughter Rosie, who was 22 and patient, and had once spent an entire Saturday afternoon watching Lily draw without once suggesting she might want to do something else. The room was full when he arrived. Evelyn was at the head of the table. Upright and still in the way she was always still, not rigid, just contained. Victor Hale sat to her left, silver-haired and smooth, with the practiced ease of a man who has spent decades making doubt sound like common sense. There were 9 board members. A few Daniel recognized from company-wide communications. Most of them looked at him with the polite blankness of people confronted with someone whose relevance they haven't yet determined. Evelyn introduced him briefly. Daniel Brooks was a senior operations lead here for 12 years. He resigned in June following a denial of a remote work request made under documented family medical circumstances. He has agreed to speak to what that experience meant, Victor said, pleasantly. "We appreciate the personal story, but this is a financial and operational discussion. The question before this board is whether an initiative of this scope, with the staffing and structural costs involved, represents a responsible use of company resources. Victor. Evelyn's voice was even. He hasn't spoken yet. Daniel stood. He hadn't prepared notes. He'd thought about it and decided that notes would make it feel like a presentation, and it wasn't a presentation. It was a fact. My daughter is 7 years old, he said. Her name is Lily. Her mother died 14 months ago in a car accident. Lily was in the car. The room was quiet. After the accident, Lily stopped speaking. Not gradually, suddenly. Her trauma therapist explained that this is a documented response. It has a name. It has treatment protocols. The treatment requires time and consistency and presence. A lot of presence. He looked at the table in front of him, not at anyone. I asked for a 3-month remote work arrangement. I documented the medical situation. I had 12 years of performance reviews that I believe speak for themselves. The request was denied in 2 sentences. No conversation. No alternative offered. He looked up. I'm not here to litigate that decision. I made my choice and I'd make it again. I'm here because Evelyn asked me to say what it felt like to be someone who built something here for 12 years and had to choose between that and his child. He picked up his water glass. Put it down. It felt like the company didn't know I existed as a person. It only knew I existed as an output. Victor shifted in his chair. With respect, individual circumstances are difficult to. I'm not asking the company to solve every individual circumstance, Daniel said. I'm saying that a structure that makes it easier to keep good people, not by lowering standards, but by acknowledging that people have lives, is not a cost. It's an investment. He sat down. No one spoke for a moment. The silence in that room had a different quality than the silence Daniel had learned to read at home. At home, silence meant processing, or protection, or the slow accumulation of something that would eventually find its way out. Here, silence meant calculation. He could feel the board members doing their math, political math, financial math, the private arithmetic of risk and position. One board member, a woman named Patricia Weir, who'd joined the board 2 years ago and who, Daniel would later learn, had returned from maternity leave to find her role restructured in her absence, said, "What would this have cost the company to grant a 3-month remote trial?" Nobody answered immediately. Victor said, "The operational disruption alone." "What did losing him cost?" Patricia said. "In recruitment, in institutional knowledge, in the downstream projects that stalled." She looked at the table in front of her. "I'd like that number." Victor opened his mouth. "I'm not asking rhetorically," Patricia said. Another silence. A different kind. Evelyn let it breathe. Then she said, "I'm going to call the vote." Victor leaned forward. "Evelyn, this is not the moment to. We have all the information we need." She looked around the table with the specific calm of someone who has decided, not in this moment, but some time ago, and has been waiting for the room to catch up. Project Lighthouse, as presented. Full structural implementation, phased over 18 months. Budget, as proposed. Daniel Brooks as program lead. She paused. "I'm calling the vote." Those in favor. 7 hands. Victor sat very still. Patricia Weir was the last to raise hers, but when she did, she looked at Daniel and gave a small nod, the kind of nod that meant, "I know what that cost. I know what this is for." Daniel looked at the table. He breathed. "Motion carries," Evelyn said. He drove back to Sunridge that afternoon. The county road through the hills, the light going golden as he descended into the valley. He called Walt's daughter to say he was on his way. He thought about what he would make for dinner. When he pulled onto Birch Road, Lily was sitting on the porch steps with biscuit and a drawing pad. She looked up when she saw his car and did not smile. She hadn't gotten back to smiling yet. Not fully, though it was there sometimes in her eyes, but she watched him park and get out and walk up the path with the attention she gave to things that mattered to her. He sat on the step below her. She showed him what she'd been drawing. A building, very tall, many windows, and a small figure walking away from it, toward a car, with a box under one arm. She'd drawn it from memory, or from some internal picture she'd been carrying. He looked at it for a while. "That's me," he said. She nodded. Walking away, she nodded again. He looked at the drawing for another long moment. Then he handed it back. "I'd do it again," he said. She held the drawing in her lap and looked at it. Then she put Biscuit on top of it and leaned back on her hands and looked at the evening sky. He sat beside her until it got dark. The notice went out to all Arcturus staff on a Wednesday in August. It was 4 paragraphs. It announced Project Lighthouse, described its purpose, a restructured support framework for employees navigating major life transitions, effective immediately for all active staff and retroactively reviewed for departures in the past 18 months, and named Daniel Brooks as program lead. It also announced, in a separate paragraph, that Victor Hale was transitioning out of his role as Chief Operations Officer. Victor's transition was described as mutual. It was not. Daniel read the notice at the kitchen table in Sunridge with a second cup of coffee and felt something he hadn't expected to feel. Not triumph, not vindication, but something quieter. A sense of the world having righted itself by a small degree. Which was, he thought, about as much as you could reasonably ask the world to do at any one time. He was working from the Birch Road house 3 days a week and driving to Portland twice. The rhythm had taken 2 weeks to find, and it was still imperfect and occasionally chaotic, and he was learning to be okay with that. He'd enrolled Lily in a summer art program at the Sunridge Community Center on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. It was small, 6 kids. A patient instructor named Georgia, who'd taught elementary school for 15 years, and had the kind of voice that made things feel manageable. Lily had spent the first session sitting apart from the other children, drawing alone. By the 3rd session, she was sitting next to a boy named Theo, who liked to draw dinosaurs and who, by some wordless negotiation Daniel never fully understood, had become her creative collaborator. He drew the dinosaurs. She drew the worlds they lived in. Dr. Reeves, who had shifted to video sessions since the move, said this was exactly the kind of organic social engagement she'd been hoping for. She said it carefully, the way she said most things, giving it room. Daniel had stopped holding his breath every morning. He noticed this about 3 weeks in that he'd been holding something tight in his chest for 14 months and had, somewhere in the August heat and the landscaping work and the evenings on the porch, let it go. Not completely, not permanently, but enough to breathe normally. On a Saturday afternoon in the 3rd week of August, he was weeding the front garden, a task Walt's son had been gently suggesting for 6 weeks, when he heard Lily behind him. She'd been sitting on the porch steps, Biscuit beside her, watching him work. He'd been aware of her the whole time, the way you're always aware of your child, a low-frequency background signal that you learn, eventually, not to consciously monitor, but that you never actually stop receiving. He heard a sound he didn't immediately recognize. He turned. She said, "Clear." A single word, clean and whole, delivered with no ceremony whatsoever, as if she said it every morning, which she would. He realized later she had said it every morning, once, before everything. It was the most ordinary word she had ever used. It was the most extraordinary thing he'd heard in 14 months. He was on his knees in the dirt. He looked at her, and she was looking back at him with those brown eyes. Biscuit under her arm, completely matter-of-fact, the way she'd always been before, as if the word had always been there, and she'd simply decided it was time to use it again. He didn't manage to say anything. He pressed the back of his hand to his mouth and looked at the sky over the oak tree and felt everything he hadn't let himself feel for 14 months. Move through him at once. The way a season changes. Suddenly, and all at once, and without asking permission. The grief and the relief were the same thing for a moment. He couldn't have told you, sitting in the dirt of his parents' front garden in the August heat, whether what was moving through him was sorrow for all the months of silence, or joy for the single word that had just broken it. It was both. They were the same current. Lily watched him cry without alarm. She'd seen him cry before. She knew it was something adults did, when they felt too much to hold inside, the way a cup overflows when you fill it past the brim. She understood it the way children understand things they haven't been taught, instinctively, and without making it strange. After a while, she climbed down from the steps and came and sat next to him in the dirt and put her head against his arm. They stayed like that until the light changed. Evelyn came back to Sunridge on a Friday in early September. She didn't call ahead. She appeared at the door at 4 in the afternoon with a bottle of wine she'd bought from a vineyard she'd passed on the county road. And she looked at Daniel on the threshold and said, "I should have called." "No," he said, and meant it. "Come in." She stood in the hallway and looked at the wall of Lily's paintings, which had expanded from the kitchen into the corridor, pinned in rough chronological order, so that you could see the progression if you stood back far enough. Abstract shapes giving way to birds, birds giving way to houses, houses beginning to include figures. "She's speaking," Daniel said from behind her. Evelyn turned. "Started 3 weeks ago." Single words at first, then phrases. Dr. Reeves says it's consistent with her trajectory, that the move here, the stability, the time. He paused. The structure, she repeated. "You asked me once why I didn't fight harder, why I just walked away, put my badge down, didn't ask to speak to anyone above Victor." She said nothing. "Because I'd already made the decision," he said. "I'd been making it for months. Every morning I'd drive 45 minutes into a building where no one knew my daughter's name, and I'd spend the day being a resource, and I'd drive home, and she'd be there waiting, and I kept thinking she's waiting for me to show up, not to provide, to show up." He looked down at his hands. "Victor just made it official." "I'm sorry," Evelyn said. "You didn't do it." "No. But I ran a company where it could happen, and that's mine to carry." He looked at her. There was something about Evelyn Carter that he'd been trying to articulate for 2 months and hadn't found the right words for. She was not warm in the way people mean when they say warm. She was not easy, or soft, or immediately welcoming. But she was present. She paid attention. She showed up, repeatedly, in a small town 3 hours from her office, with bird books and watercolor pencils and no agenda she was willing to name, and she sat on his porch and rocked in his mother's chair and told him things about herself that she'd clearly never found the right moment to say before. He'd thought about that. He'd thought about it more than he'd admitted to himself. "She drew something for you," he said. He went to the kitchen and came back with a folded piece of paper. Evelyn opened it. The Birch Road house. The oak tree. The yard, in late summer you could tell it was late summer from the colors, amber and gold at the edges. 3 figures, 1 tall, 1 medium, 1 small, and in the corner, an orange tabby cat that, as far as Daniel was aware, did not currently exist in their lives. In the lower right, in careful, deliberate letters that Daniel recognized as newer, she'd started writing words again last week. First her name, then small labels on her drawings, 2 words. "My family." Evelyn stood in his hallway and looked at the drawing for a long time. When she looked up, her eyes were bright. Daniel was watching her. "We don't have a cat," he said. "That seems like a fixable problem," she said. He almost laughed. The almost was the closest he'd gotten in a long time. "Stay for dinner," he said. It wasn't a negotiation, and it wasn't a confession. It was the kind of sentence that means something different from the words it uses that means, "I've thought about this, and I'm not as careful as I was. And Lily drew you into the picture, and the summer did something to me that I can't entirely take back." Evelyn put the drawing carefully in her jacket pocket. "Okay," she said. They ate on the back porch as the sun went down over the hills. The 3 of them, Lily sitting between the 2 adults with her feet not quite reaching the boards, pointing at things in the middle distance, a bird, a cloud formation, the creek catching the last of the light. Daniel and Evelyn talked around and past each other the way people do when they've had a lot of conversation and don't need the whole sentence to understand the meaning. Lily, at some point, said, "More bread." Evelyn passed the bread. It was the most ordinary transaction in the world. It had the specific weight of something that would only happen once, this particular way, in this particular light. Later, after Lily was in bed, Daniel and Evelyn sat on the front porch in the dark with the wine and the crickets. The street was quiet. Walt's house was lit up yellow across the road. "I didn't come here for the company," she said. It was not the first time she'd said it, but it was the first time she said it and looked at him directly while she did. He looked back. "I know," he said. The porch boards creaked. "I don't know what this is," she said. "I want to say that clearly. I don't have a plan for this part." "Neither do I," he said. "That's unusual for me." "Me too," he said. "Mostly." A pause. The creek ran somewhere in the dark behind the house. "She's going to want a real cat," Evelyn said. "I know. Orange tabby." She was specific. "She's always been specific," he said, and stopped because something in his own voice surprised him, the lightness of it. The ease, the way he'd said it, like always, was a simple word again. Evelyn was quiet. She set her wine glass on the railing and looked at the dark street and the stars over the valley hills. "I came to Sunridge because something in a file didn't add up," she said. "And now I've been here 11 times. 12, he said. "You're forgetting the Thursday in July when you only stayed an hour." She turned to look at him. This time she did smile. Not almost. Fully. 12, she said. He looked at the stars. The oak tree stood in the side yard, massive and quiet, doing what old trees do in the dark. Holding their ground, taking up exactly the space they need, waiting for the light to come back around. He thought about the first time he'd climbed that tree, 7 years old, maybe 8. His father spotting him from below with one hand raised and the other ready. He thought about how the top branches had swayed and he'd been frightened for a second and then not frightened. Only high, only far-seeing, only aware of how large the valley looked when you weren't standing at the bottom of it. Lily's drawing was in Evelyn's jacket pocket. My family. The space to the right of the 2 figures in Claire's old picture, the one Daniel had found on the coffee table, the one that had sent him to the HR desk with his badge, had been filled in, finally, not by time, not by intention, but by the particular logic of a 7-year-old who drew what she saw and named it what it was. 3 people, an oak tree, a house, 1 orange cat. Still to come. He would find the cat in October, as it happened. A stray who'd been eating from Walt's back porch for 3 weeks, orange with a white patch under its chin, deeply opinionated about mealtimes and otherwise undemanding. Lily named it Captain. She did not explain the name, and when Daniel asked, she gave him the look that meant the question had already been answered, and he simply hadn't been paying attention. He dropped it, but that was October, and this was September, and the wine was nearly gone, and the porch was quiet. And inside the house, Lily was asleep with Biscuit and the bird guide open to the page about cedar waxwings, the ones that pass berries down the line. Daniel poured the last of the wine and didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything left to say that the summer hadn't already said more honestly and with less ceremony. Sometimes the life you lose leads you somewhere you couldn't have mapped from where you were standing. You don't know it until you're already there. You don't know it until someone draws you a picture and writes your name on it and hands it to you in the afternoon light, and you look at it, and you look at the space beside you, and you stop being surprised to find it filled.